Hey everyone. First of all, a big thank you to all of you that managed to stay until the end. I know the hour is too difficult for everyone, so thank you for being here and for joining us to talk about open source LLMs. Today we're very happy that we have together three very unique speakers with very unique backgrounds. So just to kick it off with some introductions, I'd like all of you to have the chance alongside with me to meet them and learn a little bit about each and every one of them. So we can start with Yannis.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone there in Athens. I'm Yannis Paniaras. I'm connecting from Seattle. It's like 7:30 in the morning there. If you're not familiar, Seattle is in the northwest of the US near Canada. And unfortunately, I can't see the room there. I would love to be there, but I can't see a live view of the room there. But I'm a designer and I'm a design manager as well. I have been with Microsoft for several years and before that also with Nokia. And I'm involved with the Center of Excellence for AI inside Microsoft. There are multiple units like that look into AI, but I'm part of an organization that we call Microsoft Digital, which is driving Microsoft's transformation roadmap. So I'm very happy to be here together with the rest of the panelists and explore the topic of LLMs and AI. And I'll bring you some perspectives from my discipline in product making. So back to you.
Thank you very much, Yannis. Then Pantelis.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Nice to meet you here today. I'm very glad to be part of such a nice event. I'm Pantelis Lappas. I am an artificial intelligence solution architect at the Research and Innovation Development Department of Netcompany-Intrasoft, RID as it's called. RID focuses on delivering pre-industrial products and services through its participation in European programs. These European programs are associated with several fields like health, security, critical events and infrastructures, supply chain in general. Netcompany-Intrasoft, of course, is a leading IT solution and services company in Europe, focuses mostly in public sector, private sector, and of course in EU institutions. These are the three main business units of the company. Specifically, RID has two main objectives. The first one is to provide Europe with ICT-based solutions in order to solve problems actually related to the European calls every time. So there is a lot of experience, 20 years of experience in delivering such solutions. And of course, the second objective is to design and implement novel and sophisticated algorithms, supporting, of course, the main objective to deliver ICT-based solutions to Europe.
Whoa. And Ari?
Hi, everybody. My name is Aristodimos Komninos. I'm a product manager at SketchUp. First of all, I want to thank the organizing committee for inviting me to this super exciting event. And I want to thank all of you for being with us here, especially since there are two keynotes going on right now, which means two things. Either you're obsessed about open source AI models, or you couldn't find a spot upstairs. But in any case, thank you very much. So I'm going to give my perspective from the product management side of things. And even though my background is in architecture, and when I say architecture, I mean building architecture, not solution architecture. I had a very weird journey ending up in product management, but I got kind of like caught into that whirlwind that is called AI a few years ago. And ever since, I am working with several teams in Trimble, which is the parent company, to develop solutions for our customers, who are primarily architects and designers. That's how I still am relevant. My background is still relevant to what I do now. And SketchUp is actually the most popular 3D modeling tool in the world right now. And we are developing AI and GenAI solutions on top of it to make it even more accessible, even more powerful. So I'll be happy to share some of my experience with you.
So at this point, I hope all of you are as excited as I am to go into the discussion of open source LLMs with our very three experienced co-speakers. The first thing I'd like to clearly defined from the beginning so that no one gets disheartened by the end of this meeting. In this talk, we are not really going to go into the technical dips and weeps of the latest open source LLMs, like which open source LLM should you use, which embedding model should you use, what quantization to feed the GPU. We're not going to go into this. And the reason we want to take a slightly different approach is because right now with us we have 3 unique speakers with very unique backgrounds, for which, as you saw, we have someone with amazing experience from design. We have a very good solution architect that always talks with customers and can find the best solutions on how they can use LLMs, proprietary or not. And we have a very good product manager that works with SketchUp to be able to integrate LLMs. The way that we're going to approach the open source and LLMs discussion is with the first thing that everyone doesn't really realize, that in order to integrating with LLMs is not always as easy as it will seem. But at this point, I don't want to spoil the answer too much. So hopefully by the end of this presentation, you'll also get a feel of how inside of either companies that develop their own solutions and use LLMs, or for someone that wants to fit the needs of someone that needs LLMs, what is the discussion? How does open source LLMs come into play? And with this, the first thing that I would like all of us and myself as well to understand a little bit better is how are you actually a little bit in the products that you use? Arya, we'll start with you since you have some product management experience. With the products that you use, how have LLMs starting to affect the things that you produce?
Right. So first of all, I mean, you have heard that many times, and today and yesterday, we are still at the very beginning of this journey, right? And actually, I want to make a little bit of an experiment for everybody in the room. So how many in the room, raise your hand, have the word AI in your role currently? Okay, couple of hands. Keep them up, okay? How many of you had that AI name in your role last year? 2 years ago? Okay, so there is like a small cohort of people here that have been working for a long time with AI. Most of us either don't have it now or they didn't have it 1 year ago. And that was the case for me as well and for the entire company, right? We're going through a transformation right now. And the way that we are leveraging AI and GenAI is happening at different levels, right? And it started primarily with trying to build internal tools, and I think Yannis will talk a little bit more about that, how they do that in Microsoft. And those were things like, customer support, obviously trying to build internal tools to help our staff respond better to the queries coming from customers, but also in things like customer success, which is like identifying patterns in the customer use that could lead to churn and try to address that, right? However, lately we have been very intentional in using GenAI and AI to address what in product management we call jobs, right? If you are in product, that definitely kind of triggers something. So it's the kind of the whole idea of jobs to be done. How can we use that technology to serve jobs that our customers are already doing? So recently we have launched in SketchUp 2 features. One went live last summer, and the second one went live in just before Christmas, just before the holidays. And the first one is that we're helping our customers finding 3D assets, because we have a huge library of 3D assets, by using images. And lately, we are enabling them to search for assets using natural language, using LLMs. So not just keywords, there is a key difference there, right? To bring you an example, right? Previously, to find a sofa, you would have to type sofa, and you would rely on the keyword that had to be saved either in the title of the 3D model or the metadata to find the sofa, right? That is that could be problematic because you might be looking for a sofa that is an L-shaped sofa or a sofa with leather, right? So you would either have to rely on the metadata being correct, otherwise you couldn't find it. Let alone if you were not looking for that sofa in English, or if the sofa, the ideal sofa for you, was not published in English, right? So we try to bridge that gap, bringing AI and LLM into the mix. The other application that we launched recently, and we're very, very excited about it, is completely based on GenAI and specifically diffusion to create stunning visualizations from a simple 3D model and a prompt, right? And to give you an idea for those of you who are not obviously very experienced with 3D modeling and how photorealistic rendering is created, you need to create a 3D model. Sometimes it needs to be very detailed. And after that, you need to apply materials. You need to bring in artificial lighting. And you need a lot of skills to create a compelling visualization. With GenAI, all this is becoming extremely simple. You practically have to model a basic mass, like a box or a couple of boxes, if you want to, type a prompt, and you have instantly 1, 2, 3 iterations of your design. So this is about revolutionize the way design is done. And we're super excited to bring this to our customers. And again, it's early days. We're still in the kind of like feedback collection stage, but the first signs are very, very promising.
That is very, very, very interesting, I have to say. So then, Pantelis, I have to ask. Now it's interesting because you're from the other side, that you have to now to talk with customers to understand what their needs are. And I'm sure that a lot of them will say, hey, there's all of this hype for GenAI, and I want to use LLMs and whatsoever. How do you feel like now the whole discussion, as Aris mentioned, that this is a huge boom that happened the last year. How has this affected you as a solution architect on the discussions that you have the last years and regarding all of this hype and people asking, hey, can I also have LLMs, please?
Okay. So talking from the perspective of an artificial intelligence solution architect, I'm experienced in several problems, open problems, different in nature many times. So the adoption of open source LLMs typically can help someone to understand initially the business requirements and, of course, to identify some business needs, okay, from the perspective that you are not 100% familiar with the domain. So you can leverage these powerful and promising NLP techniques packaged well in an open source LLM, and of course, after identifying the business requirements or some business needs and challenges, then you can architect scalable and efficient and more value-driven solutions for the clients. So, to be honest, last years, as an AI solution architect, the adoption of open source LLMs is broadening my responsibilities because it requires more expertise related to natural programming, natural process languages, machine learning, cloud computing, security, and of course, ethical AI practices. So it is very important, after understanding the business problem, before delivering the solution, this raises many issues and challenges to be addressed. So as an AI solution architect, I need, first of all, to think about a new pipeline, new workflows in order to handle this large volume of textual data sets. I need to think about scalable deployments in the production environment, considering privacy and security issues. I need to collaborate more often with UI and UX designers in order to implement a user-friendly interface for the client. And of course, I need to think about monitoring, logging, and performance optimization mechanisms in order to satisfy the business needs, in order to deliver an explainable and trustworthy AI solution. So really, it is very challenging. So I don't feel that my responsibilities are minimized, are broadened. So in this way, I'm seeing as a challenging task, and always trying to provide a human-in-the-loop approach, because if you are thinking as an hybrid, augmented approach and try to combine the expert knowledge and the computational knowledge, this will help you to be very close to the real need that you need to solve for your clients.
I'm really holding myself right now for asking some of the technical questions because those sound too interesting, but I'm keeping really in my mind all of the problems that you mentioned about the monitoring, about the scalability, about the security, yes, about the ethical piece of it, especially because when we talk about open sources, you have to care about those things now because you're also the one that will have to run piece of that. But I'll hold on to this discussion. I'll come back because I'm also very curious to hear also from Yannis' experience, how has, especially being a designer, how has this affected, because both the products and the service that you have developed and you are now keep on integrating, how has the whole bringing LLMs into the part of let's design something that makes sense and it's easy UX-wise to use?
Great, thank you. I think I can definitely resonate with what I hear from the other panelists so far. And in fact, the changes we see is not only with the product, first of all. I'll start with the question of open LLMs versus proprietary. And I have to be honest, because the scale of what we do at Microsoft, even if it is the internal transformation of Microsoft, we're using the Microsoft Copilot, but there's also semantic copilots and there's autopilots too. It's another type of AI. And it's so big that actually, if you're a designer, even if you're a PM, you don't necessarily work with those engineers because there's thousands of people and billions of investments in this. And these investments have happened, in fact, more than a year ago. So we don't even see the whole and the end-to-end picture. This is typically in companies of this scale. And so I wouldn't even know if Microsoft is using open source or it's proprietary or if it's something hybrid. But most likely the approach is that Microsoft is not building something for itself. It's always, we have this approach that we're building platforms and we're building ecosystems. But I'll give you some examples, of course, of the transformation of what's happening. It's not just transforming the experience. And I'll give you an example of this. Like our studio is transforming the experience for Microsoft employees. And what does this mean? For example, how we interact with human resources services, right? How you apply for benefits or expense reports. IT, everything around IT, networks, like access to your infrastructure, transportation, smart campus. There's hundreds of buildings around the world are run every day. All of these processes, legal, even philanthropy, for example. So it's a very vast network of teams, and all of these are transforming. So it takes years for that transformation to happen. AI is accelerating this. Our studio is working on selective investments, the priorities, because we're relatively small compared to what needs to be done. But you ask me what is changing, right? What is transforming? And in fact, I will say everything is transforming. We're not only transforming the product and the experience. I'll give you an example, like in the IT space. If we're deploying a system of autopilot and copilot together, autopilot is scouts for technical issues, broken networks or vulnerabilities, and a co-pilot actually will assist the IT pro, the professional, who is handling an issue. So it's kind of like a symbiosis of these two. But we're not only changing the flow or the work. When we design this, we're changing the roles even, right? The role of the designer is changing. The role of the PM is changing. We're seeing something I co-termed recently, generative collaboration happening. So generative AI leads us to generative roles, right? The generative way to collaborate. Because suddenly I can do a little bit the work of a PM, or a PM can do maybe the work of a designer, or I can do more research work of utilizing AI. And this is just the beginning. I've been talking about this even 4 or 5 years ago with some other designers in the Windows design studio that I was part of in the past. And we had kind of like started looking into that as well, the impact of AI, not how it changes the experience, but it changes the relationships, how we work with the other disciplines. And it seems to me there's this effect of flattening. There were certain hierarchies and roles, and we definitely see transforming our working processes. In fact, we are trying to map now what is changing in the product making process, because speaking of LLMs, for example, there is no more, I can no longer directly design the product. I need to design indirectly and work very closely with engineers and the researchers and others and test, the loop. Kind of like you have a hypothesis of what is changing, you test it, you get some results back, you see that perhaps the results are satisfactory or not, for the goals and the metrics we have for the experience. So I would say that it's really a 360-degree transformation. It's exciting, but actually nobody's telling us how to do it. We are redefining everything. It's like how we say it at Microsoft sometimes. We are flying the plane while we are making the plane at the moment.
Thank you very much, Yanni. Now, at this point, I can't really hold it any longer. I have to ask the more interesting, the questions. Ari, from your point of view, especially the products that it's really interesting, is both of how you then integrate the LLMs with SketchUp to both from finding 3D models and to the actual product itself. But what percentage of then the LLMs that you use are open source? Like, are you using it from the experimentation phase all the way to the production? And if not, what are some challenges that made you say, no, it's going to be this line until for one and then the other?
Yeah. Okay, great question. And actually, I think our journey really illustrates how difficult it is sometimes to make those decisions or kind of like time them perfectly. And it's also something that Pantelis was saying about how like you need to first understand kind of like the business goal before you like structure or architect the solution. And the reality is that because we felt the urgency of adopting this technology, we wanted to kind of like go heads on and start experimenting and testing. And something that we do at SketchUp and Trimble is a lot of customer testing. And we interact with our users like multiple times a week. And I also bring in the engineers in those meetings so they listen exactly what the customer needs. But anyways, going back to your question about what kind of, if we're using open source or proprietary, we did start with open source. And what is important to note here is not only the model, right, but the data set. This is really critical, and it becomes very critical to our customers. And I will tell you a very real example. So we did release, we call it SketchUp Diffusion, by the way, because it's built on top of Stable Diffusion, right? So we did release that. We have released it under Labs, which is this umbrella that is very forgiving if things don't work. And our customers were excited from day zero, right? I mean, they were completely mesmerized by the solution. And after starting using it, they very soon started asking us, what is this thing trained on? Can I use those images that I generated in SketchUp to sell my design to my customer, right? So this is where the critical questions start, and where it becomes really important to not only pick the right model, but make sure that the data set that this model is trained on is appropriate for the use that you have designed it for. And there are examples from the industry. Somebody mentioned it in an earlier panel from Adobe, for example, right, where they have been they train their model on proprietary data sets as well. They made a partnership with Shutterstock to make sure that everything, I think it's Shutterstock, I'm not 100% sure, to make sure that like the generative components of Photoshop and Illustrator are based on this proprietary dataset, which means that the customer that is paying subscription to Adobe have 100% confidence that they're also paying their part, anyways, in the use of that dataset. So they can go and they can go ahead and use that in their production, and they can sell those creative assets to their customers. So there is this point in time where you have to make decisions about like experiment fast, get feedback, but when you go to production, you have to check all the boxes that kind of like match exactly what your customers are going to be doing with that, with those results or outcomes from the solutions you're creating.
Then, Pantelis, I naturally have to ask you then, how many of the customers that you're talking about to provide them solutions for, Do you have to walk them through all of this process and the pitfalls that if you're going to use something open source like this, here are the problems of what you have to do, and to kind of put more like, how many times have you felt like, okay, someone wants again open source LLMs? Here's the important things that you need to know for the project to succeed, so that you know if this really fits your needs.
Yes, it is very important to meet evolving needs in each industry. So many times need to collaborate with the clients, especially the experts in the domain, depending on the use case, in order to be sure that each step of the project is satisfied the qualitative and quantitative criteria. So this is a project. It is split in many phases. So starting with the statement of the work, customer is fully engaged in the initial steps, and after, when some tools need to be synchronized and deliver the solution, the effort is fewer, let's say, but always the client is the end user. Always the client is going to accept or reject your solution. So it is very important to include several measures, qualitative and quantitative measures to each phase in order to deliver the value.
To make sure they will not get blindsided by,
Yes.
but I thought it was this. No, it's actually 1, 2, 3 what we can do and how it will be.
Yes, the difficulty here is that open source LLMs provide access to powerful and very promising NLP techniques. So someone can leverage these models and explore different solutions, let's say, in order to provide better accuracy to the models, or to better explain the results of the model. So it's not a unique task for a solution architect or for a developer. You need the feedback in this process, and many times the use cases are so different that open source LLMs cannot deliver you the solution automatically. You need to add additional data in order to gain deeper insights into the main factors of the problem.
Thank you. And then, Yannis, now I'm curious from Microsoft's side, and when you have to use LLMs from your side of the design process, how much is it actually iteratively going that you have to get the feedback and see how the system is performing to then even change the whole process? Does it happen often, or is this process way too streamlined and it's quite a straightforward task?
It is not straightforward, definitely. Again, I want to everything the other panelists said resonates again with me, which you can actually see that even large companies, whether you are a large company or a startup, it's kind of like the same, the same process and the same challenges, because these are new technologies. Whether you applied for 100 users or 100,000 or 1 million users, you will see similarities. What we see, I'll give you an example. For example, we have been designing some experiences that were changing from the legacy way to do them with copilots for employee services, general employee. And the results, the answers that you get back from the copilot, they're not very useful. In fact, we need to actually structure the conversational UX to have a specific goal in order for the job to be done, to be met, to be achieved, plus the KRs and then the research measurements that we have to do. And so we need to start at the very beginning. Actually, when we run this model and we see the interactions of what's happening, we happen to have, of course, employees who are actually testing. But if it was a specialty role, like an IT role or something else, we will work together with that particular person, understand their workflow, and iteratively kind of like rebuild from bottom up everything. Because again, it is a non-probabilistic model. So the original UX, if you remember, we are all aware of it, the process is very linear. You can pre-design everything and then measure it, right? But in this case, we are not really designing the details. We are designing a scaffold of interaction, right? You're designing actually in a probabilistic, non-deterministic way. And that's very slippery. It's very, you need to go back and forth. And that's what I was saying, that actually there's a process, usually a 4D process. Discover, define, develop, and deliver is a very classical model. That process is being challenged as well, So from point zero, essentially, we need to bring the customer in, whether it's employees or specialty roles, understand their roles, and even understand, what they want to do with this type of technology, and then co-design. The other interesting thing is that like the user will be the designer increasingly. And what I mean by this is that like we can use AI, of course, to streamline processes and design new experiences. But what if the user, the final user, the end user, can actually have tools to design something with their AI? If you have your customized GPT, Microsoft also has Copilot Studio. So essentially, everyone with Copilot Studio can go and deploy your own Copilot. And what does this mean in product creation or UX? Think about it. And it's just early days. If you fast forward a few years down the road, what if every person, every consumer becomes a designer? Who knows,
And at this point, I would really like to structure our last conversations around. I'd really like to hear your thoughts about the future of LLMs and open source LLMs, but I have to construct a little bit based on each one of you. So, Ari, from your side, how do you feel that now that you've already, because of the urge to use open source LLMs, how do you see in the future your company their strategy for keep on using LLMs and open source LLMs?
Yeah, so on that specific question, and in fact, I had a conversation with my engineers the other day about like, hey guys, like I'm on this panel about open source versus proprietary, like when would you use what, right? So obviously, open source will stay very important and very relevant when you're trying to experiment, when you want to quickly fine-tune or like customize some models to prove for a proof of concept, right? So we will definitely continue doing that. On the other hand, like when you go on productizations, on the productization side of things, it's also very important to not only pick the right model, but also like make the right partnerships. And in fact, it's actually coincidental, but Trimble has a strategic partnership with Microsoft because that is how we wanted to kind of like future-proof our infrastructure and how we're going forward into the era of AI. Now, what Yannis was describing about this scaffolding of interaction, I find it super accurate. I actually call it a pillow, which is practically what AI and like GenAI is creating now on top of every application, right? So if you think about it, you could claim that personal computers kind of did that, like they create one common interface, and of course there were operating systems like Windows or Ubuntu that bring some kind of democratization on how we use different tools. But like under like that common like device or like operating system, there were tools that had their intricacies and their complexities that you had to learn. With AI and this scaffolding or pillow, and I'm going to explain why I call it pillow, you have a completely new like interaction interface that has the promise, it doesn't do it yet, but has the promise of allowing anyone to use any tool, essentially, right? And I'm calling it pillow because it's actually very forgiving, right? If you don't know exactly how to use the several tools of SketchUp to make a rectangle and push-pull to make a cube, you won't make a cube, right? But if you make a typo in writing "make me a cube," the future SketchUp will still make a cube for you, right? So there is this. That's why I'm calling it pillow. But just going back to your question about how is the future, I want to go back to something that Francois said in the previous panel about what companies should do. And there are actually two things that companies that I think that will thrive will do with GenAI. One is support the current workflows of their users, right? And that is what we're investing in today. We're trying to augment what our users can do by taking away some of the kind of like repetitive drudgery work that they're doing. But on the other hand, as Francois said, you have to envision what your company, what your product will look like in the future. And you have to start building towards that, that direction. And having that scaffolding / pillow layer allows you to imagine that your tool will not only be used by the users that are using it today, right? It will be like AI redefines what ease of use means, right? And that puts us in a place, like as SketchUp, to say 3D modeling can be beneficial to not only architects, designers, and engineers. 3D modeling can be beneficial to anybody, even if they don't know how to do 3D modeling, because in the future they won't need to, right? So that puts you in a completely different perspective, and you actually need to re-envision your business model, your services, your tools, considering that your audience could be much, much wider than it is today.
Thank you. Then, Pantelis, from your side, how do you see customers in the future asking more for open source LLMs or proprietary ones as part of the whole solution that you're going to create, if they're going to have more of an opinion for one over the other?
Okay, let me give some realistic examples from my experience, especially focus on financial risk management and decision-making processes. Open source LLMs, first of all, as I mentioned earlier, make accessible, powerful NLP techniques, so someone can leverage this in order to investigate further factors that can affect, let's say, the decision-making process, or find optimization opportunities. I'm talking about optimization because, last decades, people in AI domain are more familiar with some machine learning techniques. But every machine learning problem is essentially an optimization problem. Last 4 years, AI and operations research OR communities are closer than ever. So focusing on some problems in manufacturing, as these problems are highlighted in the European scheme through the European calls, I can see a lot of opportunities. It is worth noting the ML for CO 2021 competition tried to encourage the users of machine learning in solving combinatorial optimization problems. 1 year earlier, Google DeepMind team published a paper entitled "Solving Mixed Integer Programs Using Neural Networks." And coming closer to the open source LLMs communities, last 2 years, there is a lot of room for research, from considering industry needs and research needs. I can highlight, let's say, the concept called NL for opt. This is natural language for optimization. They tried to transform textual data describing decision-making problems into mathematical formulations. So any solver, commercial or non-commercial, can take this mathematical formulation and solve problems like the inventory control problems, production scheduling problems. So there is a lot of room. Open source LLMs can enable also the development of natural language interfaces, where experts and non-experts are interacting with powerful and complex algorithms. Because operations research, just to highlight the decision-making problems, typically try to transform this data into insights through clever optimization algorithms. So there is a lot of room. Machine learning algorithms can give inputs to the OR. For example, parameter selection problem, which is the optimal value for this parameter of the model. Or computational intelligence algorithms like genetic algorithms, particle swarm optimization. They try to solve complex problems characterized by complexity in terms and sometimes in space, but trying to give these solutions in a reasonable time. So there are a lot of opportunities. However, a lot of challenges need to be addressed, especially related to data privacy, to bias and fairness, and of course to model interpretability. So I'm seeing the open source LLMs as a great opportunity for industries, to give access to researchers, AI researchers, OR researchers, to give access to these powerful NLP techniques, and trying to solve really challenging problems. And if I can conclude the other area of my expertise, the financial risk management, also can be seen as a decision-making problem. So only two papers exist now in the literature, promoting and publishing some augmented intelligence systems trying to transform this textual data depicting decision problems to mathematical formulations. The one is called OptGen, published from researchers in the University of British Columbia in 2022, and actually is used BART-based encoder-decoder techniques in order to satisfy this transformation. And more recently, a paper that is going to publish, it was announced, but really it's very promising because outperforms all the state-of-the-art algorithms. It is going to be published in the International Conference of Learning Representation. It's the most important AI conference for AI practitioners. It's called Chain of Expert, and is the first, let's say, model published combining a multi-agent framework in order to do these transformations. And to conclude, especially for financial risk management, there is a lot of room. Only one paper, considering a lot of business needs in the industry, especially come from the financial industry, focuses on how can I use large language model in the financial industry. They implemented the CALM model, stands for Credit and Risk Assessment Large Language Model, is the unique large language model used in order to meet these evolving needs of the financial industry. So I would like to see open source, the future from my perspective for the open source LLMs is to have the chance to see an enhanced collaboration platform, because there is a great opportunity for accessibility and equity through the open source LLMs. And of course, to see a lot of bias and fairness mitigation approaches and model interpretability and explainable metrics. This will give a huge boost to open the source LLMs in order to create ecosystem and satisfy business needs in the real world.
Oof, I did my best to avoid the technical details, but damn, I missed you in the end.
It's an open source LLM session, so we need to share some knowledge to the audience.
And that's good, and I'm really keeping it a part of the, especially for the academia and the open, and for how it can help push even more research,
yes,
both for operations and finance. Yes. And then, Yanni, apologies if I'm going, I'll have to assign you 2 minutes for this, but
no worries. I have two things to say about LLMs. It's not going to be technical, but something to keep in mind. As a designer, what excites me actually is that like multimodal large language model. For those of you who may be not familiar with the term, multimodal means like about input and output. So imagine LLMs where it's not only text input or voice input, it's kind of actually image and other signals, that video, but you can connect it also with, external signals, IoT and even biometrics, etc. So we are really in the early stages. And the other thing that we should be paying attention and looking at is like, besides the multimodal LLMs, because they will open up the interoperability of the user experience and will make it much broader, and I'm not an expert in this, but I think it's coming, is that actually LLMs that run at the hardware layer, today with all the computation is done in the cloud. But I'm hearing about actually hardware will play a bigger role. And so what does it mean to that? Like maybe future mobile phones or smartphones will have their own chipsets and the silicon localized that will run, proprietary probably or open source, I don't know, LLMs. And that's why why OpenAI wants to invest in chipsets. But you should be seeing this, because then it means actually the scaling, instead of actually everything being centralized, potentially it can become decentralized in a way, at least at the hardware level. I think we should be paying attention to that, and we're just at the beginning. And I'm done with my 2 points.
Thank you very much, Yanni. So at this point, I think we're almost just on time as well. So thank all of you for all of your insights in the discussion today. And a good round of applause for our speakers.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Kimona, for organizing this. And thank you, Pandeli and Ari, for being together today. I look forward maybe to meet you live next time in Athens.
Thanks for waking up, Yannis.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think we have
Take care.
two minutes for questions if someone has something to ask.
I see.
Although I understand it's too. Ooh, yep.
Microsoft has been one of the early and pivotal investors of OpenAI. However, last few days we learned that Microsoft is investing in Mistral as well, which is an open source European LLM. What drove Microsoft to take this decision, and how will it change, if at all, its offering to the enterprise?
I won't be able to answer that, I would say, because that will be probably with the strategy team that deals with this. But there's one thing actually you can imagine, and you have seen it often from companies of large sizes, like these gigantic companies, right? You don't take one bet with these companies. In these companies, with like Microsoft, Google, Amazon, and others, right? It's not possible just to do all of your investment and rely with one relationship or one technology. There's more like the strategy is like multidimensional, and so there was also actually some other news recently about lighter models, actually proprietary internal models, etc. So there's a multitude of solutions in order to cover, like different types of scenarios. A strategy the like of Microsoft obviously has multiple ramifications, right? And so in order to kind of avoid dependencies, risks, they obviously want to control or win market share, or they don't want to. If you remember actually the issue with OpenAI and Sam being, fired or whatever happened, etc. That was a risk. If you are Microsoft or any company who have this type of dependencies, that is a huge risk. So you can imagine, like, whoever is designing that strategy is multiple years ahead, obviously, and they are betting on, how to leverage or non-leverage the context and the opportunities. So I don't know exactly about Mistral, but thing about strategy is always multidimensional in these big companies, because that's the nature of things. There's a lot of interest here. That I hope I answered my question. It was not a direct answer, though.
Thank you. If I may add one thing on this question, is that it's sometimes useful to also understand it's practically what Yannis was saying, right? Understanding the business model of the company that provides that open source LLM or not. And for example, we saw companies like Meta going out with only open source models. Why are they doing that? Because their business model is not to make money out of AI models. Their business model is to make money of applications that are built on their platform, right? So we're going after a different thing. And Microsoft, maybe up to a point, their business model is to make money out of licenses of AI models, but then they realize there are opportunities to diversify their AI portfolio almost because customers might have varying levels of available funds to invest in AI models. So I think Yannis is putting it this very to the point, is practically diversifying your portfolio. But we have to keep in mind always what is the bigger business goal of those big companies that are putting out open source models.
You see, you raised the point also, you made me think about this. Is there a geopolitical dimension here, right? Do you see some risks? This is a hypothesis now, but if there are some risks where, for example, European Union defines certain things, and then you're out of that market because you are a North American company, right? Yeah. Or you are out of China or out of India. You cannot access that market, etc. There could be some ramifications of that. I don't know about Mistral, right? But it's a sensitive technology and it gives you a lot of control. So expect that governments will actually regulate it. And it could be that, geopolitical factors play a role as well in here. It's what Kimona was saying, about the market is very right? But again, the risks and the opportunities are multidimensional, so probably there's a bit of everything there.
Thank you very much for this interesting discussion. I think that's a question more to Aris, but I think it's kind of related with the last point. You told us about what the Adobe model is trained on. You didn't tell us what the SketchUp model is trained on, and who owns the design eventually. And thinking about the AI Act that's coming to the EU in the following days, that's probably gonna, I don't know, maybe it's gonna block some things, putting more complexity on the commercial use of open source LLMs. What's your point on that?
Yeah, great question, and definitely putting me on the spot here. So the simple answer is that, and this is why that's like why I mentioned that SketchUp Diffusion, which is an application built on top of Stable Diffusion, is currently in labs, and we have disclaimers about like how the solution was built and what kind of models and data sets, right? The question who owns the design is so interesting, right? Because and like also your other points about different places in the world, and as Yannis said, like it's also a geopolitical question, right? Actually, just before I got up on stage, I got an email from one of my colleagues in China asking me the exact same questions about diffusion and how we can actually sell or deploy that to enterprise customers in China. So it's not simple, it's not straightforward, and we are still not in the stage where we have like the final answers about those questions. However, the who owns the design is a very interesting topic, and we had this discussion with a customer, actually one of the biggest architectural firms in the US, and they were saying that we want to make sure that the data set that the GenAI application is built on is proprietary, or like we can license it so we can sell those designs to our customers. And they moved on saying that, in fact, we might want, and this is something that like we definitely want to offer, to train a model or a version of SketchUp Diffusion on our own data set or our own images, which raises a very interesting question, right? For example, architectural company A, does it own the rights to their images, or is it their customers who own the rights to those images, right? Because those are photorealistic renderings, for example, or architectural drawings of a project that they developed for a customer. And in the contract, the customer owns everything. So it raises the question of like that ownership of data goes very far. And what I think is that potentially in the future, we will see contracts changing just because of this technology, right? Architectural firms and any other creative practice will need to put terms in place in order for them to own their own creative work because they will want to use it for GenAI purposes in the future. So it's really perplexed, actually. And even if we kind of like did a similar thing as Adobe and said, okay, we're gonna get Shutterstock images to train our models, and when you're paying for a subscription, you're paying for that as well. It's just like kind of like tackling the first hurdle in this discussion, but then there will be more, right? Because people will definitely want to train models on their own data, and as Yannis said, you might even have that on like a hardware. You might have your personal AI, but then the question of who owns that data is much broader. To directly answer your question, our data set is still an open data set. It's Lion 5, I think. But this is a disclaimer when somebody is using SketchUp Diffusion. The generated images are based on that data set, which has kind of like stopped some clients from using that with their customers. They're using it internally to get ideas. They don't use it for final production yet.
Nice.
And if I may, it is worth mentioning that this is an evolutionary approach. You never stop. You need to train again and again. So you need to think for several metrics in order to deliver this business value. And one of the open issues in the open source LLMs is also model governance and ethical guidelines. So it is because all this data probably consists of sensitive data. There are a lot of approaches. There are a lot of additional AI-powered tools that can play with this sensitive data, but it's up to the fairness approach you are going to follow. So these are open issues to open source LLMs in order to be fully competitive with the closed ones.
No, just a last question. I would like to ask, how do you choose your open source tools? I say this because you have made an assumption. You have made an assumption that the audience should not be very burdened with technical thing. But I doubt that there are a lot of people here who don't even know what is open source. So your assumption, I wouldn't agree with your assumption. So I would like to know, given that there are at least 100 of tools, how do you choose them, and what would you name? Perhaps you could name a couple of them that are the most promising, because it's very difficult to identify which tool shall I use in my company or in my research.
So there are a lot of criteria to be considered. There is no an easy task to select an open source LLM. So there are, fortunately, there are a lot of open source LLMs available, and you need to take into consideration the main characteristics and the strength and the advantages of each one. So initially, understanding the business need, you need to see carefully the technical characteristics of this open source LLM. Are not all open source LLMs ready to solve any problem of interest? So if you want an LLM for using another language than English, let's say, so you need to carefully select one. For example, Mixtral is one of the open source LLMs that support more than one language: English, German, French, and so on, because it's a French company. So one criterion is, for example, the selected language. The domain is also another criteria to be considered. Some LLMs are pre-trained with specific data, so it is very important to see if the LLM, the pre-trained, actually open source LLM you are going to download and trying to play with it, if it is in which data it was trained, with how many parameters. There are open source LLMs trained with 7 billion. Other were 175 billion, and so on. So all these are criteria. To be honest, the one thing that an LLM, each LLM can do very successfully is that can facilitate a group decision-making approach, allowing someone to share ideas, solutions, thoughts. So all these ideas, thoughts, assume that there are many players in the same LLM. They can share these ideas, so all this can be an input for a selection process. Typically, these problems have already been solved from other sciences many years ago. For example, the decision-making problem, the multi-criteria decision analysis approach, is a problem that have already modeled, highlighted from 70s. So the idea is how you can use the advantages of open source LLMs, how you can combine the open source LLMs with other additional tools in order to give the solution you prefer, the solution you desire. So assuming that if you can consider quantitative criteria, and you have many players to decide, because there is no an individual decision making in the industry. It's a group decision making, and probably each decision maker has a specific weight. Another weight you have for the CEO, another for the CTO, and so on. So it's not an easy task. In order to select the open source LLM to solve your problem, you need to consider a lot of criteria, and the most important is to have some measures and calculate the consistency of the decision-making process. Why you select this one open source LLM and not the other one? Okay, because you need to satisfy the key players in the group decision team. So there are a lot of tools. To conclude, it's not an easy task. Depend on the use case, on the problem you are interested to solve, in which data this open source LLM have already been trained, which are the additional data of your client to be included in the process in order to gain some knowledge from these tools and so on. I hope that I have answered in a way.
And to add just, I'm really keeping the language and the domain pieces that you mentioned on the deciding which model. One that we hear a lot from Canonical with customers when we go, it might not be the case with big organizations, but for small startups for sure. But Elise also mentioned the size of the model, like 7 billion parameters, 175 billion parameters. This size also dictates when you have to run it, how big is the model and how fast can it run, because if you might want to have very fast results in your and the product will need very slow latency, this means that you need a GPU with 100 gigabytes of VRAM, for example. So then, depending also on the latency, this will need to, okay, what big model should I take? And this is why Mistral, for example, had a lot of hype, because with just 7 billion parameters, could really outperform even Llama with 13 billion plus parameters. So. Yeah.
Although, if I may, there are a lot of exceptions. When Llama 2 launched, okay, with not so many billions of parameters with respect to some other closed LLMs, the performance was very nice. The Hugging Face highlighted the performance of Llama 2 with respect, in contrast with some other popular LLMs. So this, of course, is something that is very often in the literature, because depends also how this model was trained, with which algorithm, with encoder-decoder approach, with some traditional transformers, with reinforcement learning with human expert. There are a lot of techniques at the background to train this model. So this can give different results. So it's a continuous learning approach, and you need to see a lot of things.
Should I try one more time?
Okay.
Thank you very much.
We are the last one.